So, Pre-Mortem 2, beautiful, fast, epic, and amazing. P.S. You have no resources. We initially did this talk, well, by we, the royal we. Joel gave this talk down at Unite last year, and since then, obviously, and a bit of time has passed, so we've come back, we've updated what we can, added to it, changed a few things, and we're continuing to document all of our lessons learned from the very start, because most people do postmortems, but you lose a lot of information at that point, and those little things that you go, oh yeah, I should have remembered that. And so we wanted to start our documentation early on. So we, as a company, you can do clicking? Perfect. So Prideful Sloth is who we are. Basically, we set ourselves up to be micro AAA. I guess people would call that III. We've gone micro AAA because that's our background. We all have recently worked on AAA projects. We've learned a lot from that. So really where we come from, technical background, world building, and focus on player-driven experiences. And you'll see why on the next slide. Oh, not that slide. Oh, maybe the next slide after that. Sorry. Okay, so basically the current title we're working on, Project Columbus, its working name, we really want to change that, so don't hold it against us. Basically non-combative exploration RPG, where you roam enchanting landscapes, explore, settle, and shape. It's nice to say basically it's an open world game that you get to run around and do your own thing, and that's
video.
Okay. So this is our pitch trailer that we sent out when we were demoing and trying to seek funding.
Scary to think that's nearly, what, a year old?
About 9 months old now. Yes. Ooh, you have your thing set for low timeouts, I think.
Yeah, you can tell how prepared we were for this.
Sorry.
Play!
Shall we go into your power options?
Yeah, your power options are set so that it's being, it's your, possibly your screensaver. Sorry.
You just click on, I think, change plan settings.
Change
Right.
plan settings. Whoop.
Bit up, a little bit up. Yeah, that one.
That guy.
Just
Yeah, that's your
make it
display.
down.
That might help.
There we go.
Woohoo, thanks, Ash.
All right, let's watch that again.
It was so amazing.
Maybe, or not.
Is the cable in properly? Kind of looks like it's falling out.
Yeah, that's all good. That's all
We
good.
can go on without the video if we want. Anyway,
All right.
we'll go on. So we'll just go on, sorry. Basically, this is me. That's the slide that our marketing team wrote.
Hang
Woo.
on a sec. We're doing crazy.
What do we do now?
All right, go.
Okay, so this is me. That's the marketing slide that they wrote. Basically, background, started out, I studied programming, moved into project management, and that's where my main focus has been, but I've obviously worked on community management along the way throughout, before community management actually existed, so back MUDs, before MMOs, had graphics, that sort of stuff. I've also done business development, and yeah, just general production work is where I've started. Joel, he's basically, again, marketing, writing. Basically, he's started out as an artist, moved into technical art, and then graphics programming, and has probably, what does it say, 15? You've got about 15 years in the industry.
Yeah, I think we were rounding to decades, so it's like
So.
14 or something.
Hi, John. So John has recently joined us. Again, he's a wizard, or you can call him Captain Krispy Kreme, as I like to call him now. Thank you, John. And basically, so John has joined our team, and he is going to be the main technical wizard of our team. So, and that's our dog. He basically features in pretty much all our lives now, and he is the embodiment of chaos, which we will get into in another slide later. So again, this is the slide. This is some of the stuff we've done recently. So that's where our AAA background has come from, and some of our most recent projects before we came back.
Yeah, so most recently obviously we were over in the UK for a good, 6 years or so.
6.5,
Yeah, so we're pulling on a little bit of that experience.
So basically, we're going to cover Project Columbus, but not as a project per se, more so the steps we've taken to build the project, what we're doing, so the inception, kickoff, some stuff we've learned that hopefully other people will find useful. We did, unfortunately, possibly some of them a bit later than we would have liked. And so what kind of you can do, at least what we did to successfully get a project started and funded. So these are some of the stats that we have about the project. When we started with, our prototype was a vertical slice, which is basically, you got to over-deliver now. If you want to seek funding, it's not an idea and it's not a rough prototype. It needs to be a fairly fleshed out prototype now. So really our prototype was a vertical slice. About 4 months invested between 2 people. It was part-time while we were doing other things. Obviously we're now up to 3 people. Again, hi John. But where the time has gone, about 7 months of that went into building company decks, building pitch decks, putting that video together, researching who to talk to, talking to them, waiting on them, talking to other people. That's where so much of it went. And then even after we were told that we had funding, we spent 4 months waiting for a contract. So this is where we started. We came back last year, just literally over a year ago from the UK. We had our game concept that we started working on. We started building our demo, our prototype vertical slice demo. We set up the company, and this was quite important for registering for developer access and a number of other issues. You have to be a company with an ABN, so that took a little bit of time and money to do that as well. So we started doing our pitches to publishers after doing our research on who we wanted to talk to. So we made it to the green light for funding. We got our funding, and in all of this, where we probably should have been excited, we weren't, because we had gotten a puppy. And he liked to destroy everything, make sure we didn't sleep at night. So at the point where we were told we had funding secured, we probably should have been ecstatic. Instead, we were just tired. It's kind of like being a new parent, but with a fur baby, I'm sure. And
Likes to really screw up, doesn't it?
Yeah.
All right, we'll wing it. So basically, the puppy side is kind of important because on our own little personal journey here, it's the thing that kept us grounded. Basically, when we should have been sweating bullets about, our personal finances are sinking to zero, and basically, we've got deadlines that we can't possibly meet, or too many people that we need to talk to, the puppy needed to get fed. The puppy was destroying a part of a couch. The puppy was doing something. It was seriously a big deal to us that it kept us sane.
or insane in its own way.
Pretty much. So continuing on from that, which is where we left off at the Unite talk.
Yep.
Basically, the journey past that is now.
As we click. So waiting for contract, that was a long time. We were told back in October we had funding. We finally saw our contract in February. So that's when our dog decided to jump off the couch and fracture his knee. So instead, instead of worrying about the contract coming in, we were worried about, was he going to need this surgery? So again, contract arrived. Guess what? The dog jumped off the couch, injured his other leg. So this is, again, instead of worrying about the fact that we finally may actually see money in our bank accounts, which as Joel rightly said was going down, not up, not ideal, we were more worried about forking out money to get the dog back in health. And he's made sure to really keep us grounded and happy. Focused on him. So finally, very recently, we saw funds, which was, again, another 6 or 8 weeks even after the contract was finalized. So, and we finally got to start development properly in February. So that's pretty much where we're at.
Which, for a project which started in February, I think it's worth mentioning that because of all of these delays, which are all unplanned and all things which just happen, basically funding hit extremely recently, and so we've essentially been developing the game off of our own finances and our own time.
For a year.
For a year, give or take. It's worth considering those things if you're ever going to go this route, is just how much time investment is in turnaround between hearing something and actually occurring.
And yet, while you're waiting for the money, you still have milestones that you're now committed to, and so you start forking out more of your own money to cover it until the money comes in. Yes.
When you say funding, is it a private investor or a large company?
Platform holder.
So major investment.
So we have a number of topics we can cover. There is literally about 90 slides, I think, on this, because we've just brain dumped everything that we've been through and updated it. So really, we want to leave it to you guys. What interests you to cover first? Because we may not get through it all. So we can triage and go through concept and game design. This is for anybody who's a real designer. This is us not being designers, so you might laugh at some of what we've got in there. Art and content, technology, business, and also some stuff that GDC, just to cover what, from my perspective as a first timer at GDC this year, what I saw.
So show of hands, it's not a democracy, so you can vote more than once. Concept and game design, who's interested? Cool, cool.
Okay.
Art and content, cool. Technology, alrighty. Business, fun, business. And finally, GDC wrap up. You voted on everything.
I think sound and game design and technology were probably the highest of the two to start with. So why don't we just go straight into design then?
All right, well, that's easy. That's,
Okay.
I think, the first thing.
All right, so
You get this
basically,
one?
yep, I get this one. Columbus was basically my brain baby. This is the thing that sprung out of my head, and how to take somebody from production who's very realistic and try and pull out conceptual ideas, which I don't think I have many of, but anyway. All right, let's go. So basically, again, this started with a germ of an idea. This is what I call my brain baby. It was this thing. I play a lot of Japanese games. I'm inspired by them, so that's where some of this started. And really, one of the things that I started to look at was, when you play games, I love Skyrim, I love my RPGs, but when you tell somebody else about what you did, it's not about what you hit with a stick. It's about what you saw, what was interesting, what was new, what was different, and how did that compare to your experience. And so we wanted to go down the idea of no combat and what the experience is about, rather than hitting shit with sticks, basically. That's so that became our loose concept. Harvest Moon, open world, that's where we're at. So through plenty of lunches, breakfasts, whatever we did, we started to solidify the concept. We started to nail down what were the pillars, what we wanted to focus on, what was important to us to make this, which is discovering, trading, crafting, no combat, adventure, so exploration. We wanted it to feel really lovely. It's a place that we want you to want to spend time in. And from that, we started working out, is it worth making? That's always a really hard question to ask yourself, because you love your idea, but is it worth making? And so that's where we had to sit down and go through what it was. Was it good enough? Why was it good enough? Why wasn't it good enough? And who would be playing it if we did actually make it? From that side, again, started doing the digging up of VG charts and looking at those. What is available? What are the sales figures? Because these are the things that we have to tell somebody, yes, we can make a product. Yes, it will make money. How do we do that? We use past to show them that worked. So we worked out, can we make this? Yes. Do we want to make this? Yes. So these were our pillars that we came down with. Explore and discover. So we really want the world dynamic, seasonal changes, so spring, summer, autumn, winter. We want animals to migrate. We have day-night cycles in the game. We really wanted this world to feel alive. At any point, even though it's a single-player game, you should never feel alone. The safe, inviting world, there's no combat. There's no direct there's no direct conflict. The conflict we do have is through working with other people, building things, solving problems, and going forward. Your RPG quests. They're there to help build that story and narrative up for the player. This keeps flashing on and off. So crafting and trading, I love crafting. I always have. I actually like trading too. So we have no economy. There's no gold. It's all barter-based economy. And I really want to go to town on crafting. So like I said, I just love crafting. I don't know. So that features in there. And play your way. Really, it's about trying to give the player enough to create their own. Is it flashing up there too? Okay, yeah. So that's really more about trying to set it up. Emergent narrative, if you will, but also the limiting of barriers. What a lot of people do in games is they set up to say, right, you can go here first, but you cannot go anywhere else, and then you can go here. What we want to do is, there will be barriers, and they're going to say we've found a magical way to make everything open at the start and actually flow through. But what we want to make sure is that if you see something, you should be able to, for the most part, run to it. That the world is there for you to explore. So you might spend an hour or 2 hours in the game before you even decide to start your first quest. There's enough to just look around at and do.
Okay.
Yep. So again, crafting, that's really, these are our core mechanics. Craft. Make things, enhance things. We all know crafting, it's there. Again, trading on that side, which is actually a little bit harder than it seems in terms of the visual language, to try and tell people how much does a rock cost, how much does a piece of wood cost, what's the value of trading those things. So that's actually where taking away gold makes our job actually harder than we realized at the start by a pure trade economy, is the language that we need to explain to the players so that they understand what's going on. Exploration, again, that's literally pick up and run. This is for, this is our motto, and this is a huge one, is you should be able, for the most part, to go wherever you can see something. And shape and settle, this is about the dynamics that you're doing through the quests and through the things in the world that you're trying to build up and make it feel like you've accomplished something, but also to take and build it up so that you feel invested in that world. So, you start with a little plot of land. You can build it up to a farm. You can go get your cows and take them in, or groffles in our case. It's those things that give the player the sense of ownership and feeling about what they're doing and why they want to continue to come back.
From my side as well, the actual trade and economy side, it's really interesting the fact that it is a barter-based economy, because basically from a simulation implementation point of view, it's a simulated economy where, say, booms and busts happen. There's global and local events which shape the economical simulation. So, for instance, you can flood the market, you can basically make scarcity happen by introducing, or inflating value. So from that sort of perspective, having that happen and then propagate through the world is really interesting, and also amazingly challenging to show to a player, especially if our demographics are including things like young people. It's just a very interesting challenge from a design perspective.
So how basically we kind of got to building our prototype. We obviously worked in rapid prototype. We wanted to get it up as soon as possible. So to do that, we basically defined what the core mechanics were. So we started off, with just the simplest user stories, if you want to call them user stories. What do? I run around. So what do? I pick up stuff. I'm going to make something from the base items that I've already got. Somebody's going to give me a task, a quest to go accomplish. I'm going to trade with people. I'm going to discover things. Those were that's basically the little pieces that we started. So, we very shortly had a character running around. We then had a character picking up stuff. And so we just tried to break it down into the simplest step 1, step 2, step 3 process to get something working. So again, this is rapid prototyping, iterative passes as we prototyped. these iterative passes were constantly adding the user stories, but it points to we were also user testing and focus testing a little bit about what was already there, trying to find out, did it feel right? Were we going in the right direction? And we did that with people who weren't us, because this is our baby, so of course we think it's the best thing in the world. Somebody else can be a little bit more honest of whether it is or isn't the best thing in the world. And so every time we did a mechanic, we always, constantly had to have that working and integrated with everything else that was already existing in the game. And so again, from here, we took and did the focus tests with the different audiences. Again, that loops back into our iteration process, make changes, refine mechanics. That's from feedback we've got. And the one that stands out is uniformly polish elements that stand out. This is that thing where if you have, we're as a starting point, we're building to 80%. And the reason I say that is because if you build everything uniformly, it's all going to work well together. But if you have one thing that is amazing and everything else isn't, then that stands out and everything else is let down by that, because that one thing is amazing. So as a starting point, we're aiming to have everything uniform, and then we can polish uniformly and take it up to that 100%. But we're getting it working and we're getting it nice. And then we will continue to work on it over the next 14 months to make it great. And again, so that's all right. Basically, cut things that don't work or redefine them, figure out how they do work. And again, don't spend a lot of time doing that either, because if you can't find how something works, you're probably going to be wasting time trying to shoehorn it in, get rid of it, move on, and maybe later you'll figure out how that was meant to work. So from here, next slide. Uh-oh. Boop. That's not good.
Oh, jeez.
Uh-oh.
This teaches us for not showing up earlier.
Well, we tried to, but that's a different story. Slide 23. I don't think it likes the back.
Should have used a Mac. There's the Mac.
Here's one I prepared earlier. Thanks, John. As you can see, John's already proving his value in the company. This is slide 22.
Oops, 22. 22.
Okay, yeah. All right, so.
All right, you go from there, you click.
Okay.
And I'll get this set up.
All right. Ah. Okay, so basically, our design process, the iteration part of it was very vital to us in getting feedback from everybody that tested it. We actually use this too because we learned things about our own game that we didn't realize were there. And that was also at times gut-wrenching, but also times very, very ecstatic to have found these things that we didn't recognize ourselves. It also helped us define our audience because we had a loose definition, but through early focus tests, that really gave us an idea of what people liked about it and who they were that liked it. And this also gave us some new outlets to explore in terms of the types of mechanics we might implement because of the audience we started to find that emerged through our testing. And basically, this is why we check our design with the 7-year-old. Some of you might know who Violet is. Violet Stark is basically our first fan and our #1 fan, and she is every time she comes over, can I play your game? Even if it's not changed, she still wants to play it. So now she has become the person that we sanity check a lot of these things through because she is basically one of our core market. So once we felt, okay, it's doing that thing again. There we go. All right.
Here's one we prepared earlier. Oh, good.
On a Mac.
Oh, good.
There we go.
All right, what do we got? HDMI or DisplayPort?
Or HDMI, what as well.
Okay, doesn't matter. Swapsies. Cool. Up to the way on this thing. Thank you.
Right, now the second stage. Wow, it must be the actual, yes, the actual HDMI cable.
Take that. Take that, Mac lovers. Take that.
Were you using the DisplayPort thing before?
Yeah, I was using DisplayPort before, so we'll try that. I'm pretty sure it would just be this then.
Maybe it's out of date.
So, yeah. All right, cool. Just know it's not Windows.
It's always still Windows.
Microsoft might be watching. There's always room for future funding.
All right, sweet. Is that cheap?
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. And you guys.
Oh, wow.
Oh, you've even got your notes this time.
That's
okay,
fun.
it's going to suddenly be so much more professional.
Sorry, I'll,
Because we're on a Mac.
Yeah.
I'll change the price. Aha, I know how to do this now. Cool. So that should work now. And present a view.
Ooh.
Done.
Go for it.
Try that.
Yeah, he can.
So,
Nice
All right.
job.
So once we moved on from making the basics of our prototype, we then had to start with our development roadmap. We needed to show that we could viably complete the project, and then we had to start justifying why you should give us money, is the short answer to that. So with the design pitch, we actually we had a number of people that wanted to know about MVPs and different scopes that we could deliver. So we pulled an MVP down to a fairly low scope that we could get, but we also highlighted that we felt that a lot of the core that makes the game what it is would be lost if we pulled it down to a true MVP. The extras are the things that really make it shine. And then we also had to call out additional scope. The biggest question we got asked from everybody was, what's your social, what did they call it?
I just call it social strategy.
Social strategy. So what are you going to do to keep people coming back? What are you going to do to get them to continue to share information about your game after it's launched so that more people want to buy it? So again, this is probably something that everybody who's done mobile is very aware of, but this is something that on console, we're just like, yeah, it's a console game. But apparently social strategy is still quite important on platform as well too.
So for all you mobile people, you'll know the buzzwords virality and retention. For us, it's this crazy new world of paying once and actually owning a product. So for us, that was a new challenge, and coming up with a solid design for potentials with that, wrapping them into both the minimum viable product as well as, here's 4 other options. That was actually a sizable challenge for us coming from console development.
Oh, you did it, okay.
Control.
All right, you got it quicker. All right, so then we started making pitch material. What we did is we delivered a few things, the video, which kind of died out earlier. Maybe we can see that later. We created what we called a overview sheet. Concept overview is a 2-pager, and we took this as our marketing sheet. This is the thing that if EB Games, GameStop were to sell your game, what are the things that they would talk about in trying to excite people and pay them money to buy your game? So we kept that document we kept light on detail. We covered our pillars. We covered some of the aspirational things we want to do with our game. But at the same time, we didn't include anything in there that was going to harm us if it ever went public. And again, that's probably something to keep in mind at all times. Now we're in a digital age where one accidental slip means you could have sent your email to the wrong person. Somebody could forward it on without telling you. So again, everything that we talked about, we were happy with. Not happy with, but we accepted that if it went public, it was not ever going to cause a problem with anything we did. So then again, this is the pitch deck that took a fair amount of time, but it's nice. There's actually a number of templates out there that we used, and we also used our friends, people who've done this before, to get theirs to help as a template for ours. And now our template is going on to help other people in theirs pitching. So share those resources. If you've got one or you know somebody that might, share it on, because they're not going to be making your game, you're not going to be making theirs, so there's no reason to not share. And again, a company deck, which was one we had not heard of until we got an email saying, oh yeah, can you tell us about your company? Maybe somebody else knows about that one, but we were just used to a few slides about us and off we went. So then suddenly we were creating yet another deck about who we are, what our goals are as a company, what our aspirations are as a company. So that was a fun one too. So really, so this is kind of our, what did we learn from this? And it is about getting your high levels defined early on. What are your goals? What are your, what are your pillars? What are the things that you must have, and what are the things you absolutely won't have? So again, we need the do's and don'ts for internal use. This is the one that they like to stir me on, is no combat. So they suddenly decide, oh yeah, well, while you're away at GDC, we might introduce some combat. No combat. So, define those internally. Make sure everybody's clear on those, because you need those to guide. And when you come up with an idea or a mechanic, you need those there to sanity check. Is this right? Is this right for my pillars? Is this right for what the direction of this game? And is it right for my audience? Do your due diligence. That's down to what other games are out there. What are they doing that's wrong? We've all read reviews. Now, again, we know that some reviews, people just blatantly are not happy with something. So, we've got to filter out, those things. But what did the last title that's like yours do wrong? What did it do well at? What is your audience buying right now? Know what that is, because you will get asked about that, and you need to basically be able to talk about that on a dime. And again, know your product. So,
All right, so
I think tech
was probably a little bit more voted in, so let's skip ahead a little. All right, so my background is a little odd. I'll steal this. Oh. I started out as a character artist. I moved into technical art. I moved a little further into that and started to specialize in more like graphics engineering, and finally in engine team, so more core system sorts of stuff. So I'm a bit of a unicorn, like Mr. Tim Dawson there. Basically, art and coding and trying to bridge the two. So one of my main focuses is pretty tech. So that's mainly what I'll focus on here, as well as the more foundational systems that we've had to develop along the way. So first of all, the core systems. Basically, we started out with basic foundations. The main aim was just to keep a simple sort of structure, use that as the foundational basis throughout the project. So pretty much everything in the game falls within three major categories. First one is basically just system sort of level management. So that's performed by controllers. Under that is subcontrollers, which are basically the same thing. The difference is that a controller is basically high level, global scoped, whereas a subcontroller can be instanced, added, removed, whatever. They're also able to be proxy, so if we ever wanted to deviate and suddenly make this multiplayer or an MMO or something like that, then there can be lots of clients or dummy terminals or whatever. They can basically live outside of everything else. Then on a more data-oriented sort of way, there's actors. So they're local, they have an interface to manage persistence and serialization. It's an open world, so basically we've got the same style of challenges to overcome as if you're making a Fallout or a Skyrim or whatever. From our tool side, GenTools is kind of an interesting one to talk about. So GenTools is, okay, so to begin with, we've made it as a helper to basically just help with syncing of the project. Like, if we get someone new on board, and we can basically get them up and running with a single button click sort of thing. It's been used and abused a lot since then, and it's changed into something very different. Since we have an open world game, we've got a lot of data in flight. GenTools iterates over that data and performs automatic tasks, such as baking level probe data, refreshing LODs, fixing up all common issues that may come up from, like, common placement problems or serialization problems or whatever. The intent is now that it will do the monkey work for you. You don't need to waste your time with worrying about if some actor is sitting outside of where it should be living, because GenTools will just place it back where it should be, non-destructively, which is obviously important. There is a hell of a lot of data in an open world game. GenTools is basically the little gatekeeper at the end of the chain, which makes sure that everything is running smoothly. So basically, as its role as an automation platform, it touches every level. So in Unity, which is what we're using, the abstraction there is a scene. So it basically will just spider through every scene, every collection of data, makes changes, tags levels, actors, the main interface that it uses to basically track these changes and keep itself in check, as well as you, is basically binding metadata to them. That's editor-only metadata, so we don't keep all this junk around. We don't basically bloat everything that we're doing. It just lets us apply all sorts of conditions to the tasks that we give GenTools. So it makes it particularly stable with multiple users, just saves us a heap of time. Actually, a really solid example of this is if we make a new asset, say a new tree type, we can give GenTools a automated task of propagating that for us, because we don't want to go in and place 2,000 of these things by hand. We've already done that quite a few times. Let's get GenTools to do it. So we give it the rule of, this tree has to live in this biome, and we want it to be at this altitude, and we want it to be at a density of this much, and whatever. Yep.
How do you specify your rules?
Rules are not, unfortunately, code-driven. They are hard-coded. So we have basically some little templated abstracts. We can fill those in with some reusable condition loops, and they'll go off and check against metadata of to make sure that it hasn't already done this to that asset, or if it's been whitelisted or blacklisted, so that it can basically do this in an iterative as well as historical way.
Do you have like a library of rules that you can select from later?
Yeah, so as we've been building these things, we've tried to keep it rather high level, so that, you can basically pull from and mix and match. In practice, though, it has been a bit more on the side of, for every new thing that you come up with and go, hey, can we have used GenTools to do this thing for us? The answer is generally, but you gotta be a bit more inventive and come up with a special way to make that happen. So for instance, if you're trying to place a small rock automatically versus a large tree, then you have to worry about height clearance for the tree versus you're more interested in
Where do you make the
density around.
You've got to decide when you're going to automate something, if the job is kind of big enough to worth people automating. How do you decide that?
It's generally one of two things. So first of all, basically number of clicks, hours on seat, that sort of thing. It's pretty obvious, if it's going to take you half a day to make a rule set, which you can estimate pretty well, this will generally give us 95% of the way there, and then the last 5% we can do by hand. Versus the viability of that, so pure time versus time wastage, so time investment versus time wastage, versus reuse of that. So repetition of tasks and historical repetition of tasks is the other main thing that has to come into that sort of idea of trying to validate that as a practical way to go ahead with it. So a good example of that, so if you wanted to basically, let's keep with the same analogy. Placement's an easy one to talk about because it's nice and obvious. You got to place lots of stuff. If we wanted to roll out a certain density of something which is collectible, that's going to have an impact on design. Design rules means that there should be a certain scarcity of this thing. Maybe we need to come back to that later. Maybe it was too much that we placed. Maybe we don't want to go through by hand in lots of regions of the world and thin these things out. So one way that we can do that is with GenTools, if we did it to begin with, automated, and we've had markup on that thing to say, hey, I've been placed by GenTools. I haven't been modified after that by an artist or a designer. I am just purely automatically placed in the world. It knows that. Versus something that someone else has come in later and manually placed. We don't want to touch that one. With that sort of context, you can basically say, GenTools, thin out 1 in every 10. Don't touch the ones that you didn't place. So in that way, it potentially would have been, maybe as cost effective to have placed these things by hand, but you wouldn't have had the opportunity to reuse those rule sets and that sort of binded data or historical data to make those high level calls again. Hopefully that's a clear example of where, time versus that idea of reuse or patterning makes sense. So in an open world game, obviously streaming is a big deal. The method that we use in terms of our data layout and our data management, we chunk it up into these cells. So it's basically a grid which is offset. So it's like a brick pattern. The world's pretty big. It's a little more complex to basically do this staggered pattern compared to just a basic grid, but it does add actually quite a few advantages. It's quite significant in the end. So since there's only ever a maximum of 3 shared borders versus 4, that cuts down massively on the overhead of streaming that you would normally get on a worst case on a grid. It's really easy to index into and do common spatial tests against still. So it's a really good trade-off between basically cutting down worst case of 4 borders plus the waterfall effect of having to stream in multiple exterior shells of world chunks. So if you're ever looking at basically doing spatial layout stuff, I'd recommend this way. It's easier than a hexagon and it's better than a grid. Yep.
I was going to say, what is the problem with hexagon? Why do you guys prefer
Hexagons are interesting. Mathematically, there's a little bit more complexity with doing spatial tests. You can't just do a simple AABB sort of check against things. So if you need to just do common testings for is this in this area? It's not as easy to just do a index with an offset. So it's not massively intensive to do that with a hexagon layout, but you do need to do a bit more, just a little bit more work, which means that if you need to do a few 100,000 times a frame, it's obviously kind of bad.
Can you explain what you mean by a maximum of 3 shared borders?
Yeah, so if you sat on the intersection between any of these cells, you're only going to be sitting on 3. If you had just a simple X by Y grid, then you'd be sitting on 4. It's a little bit hard to visualize just based off this sort of setup, but if you imagine if you were at the center of this X0, Y0, and we needed at a minimum the shared borders loaded in at the full resolution, then you'd obviously need the 2, 4, 6 around it. If you're on a grid, then you would need at least the 2, so 7 more. So just 1 extra. Doesn't seem that significant, but it also isn't the worst case for, say, if you're crossing borders, you don't get the overhead of needing immediately 4 or more versus 3 or more. That has a waterfall effect. If you needed to spatially then go out another ring, it's basically an n-squared sort of problem. It's an exponential gain that you get out of this sort of setup.
Is it purely just for performance, or is it
Predominantly performance, but it's also a lot easier to use and set up the data as well. So there is a managerial sort of elegance to it as well in comparison to some other schemes.
You mentioned something about the size of your grid relative to the world versus your loading.
Yep, so basically that's our world. So I think we've got something like 96 cells all up. I believe... Yeah, okay, I believe I've got some data on that. Yeah, so I should be able to answer that in the next few slides. Okay, so with our streaming, we've got a fairly vanilla job queue to manage the streaming overhead. So it consumes a job, loads the level, returns a handshake once the level is loaded, so that then that can be registered with the streaming manager and starts initializing all of its content. The initialization period is deferred so that we don't have like an immediate overhead of, hey, this level's just come in and now we need to kick off everything that's inside that level. Basically, the only real exotic thing about that that you have to be wary of as an edge case is to worry about a emergency sort of period of, say, for example, if you suddenly jump into a dune buggy or something crazy and you can go at 50 times your regular speed, you could outrun the streaming rate. So in edge cases like that, if you, say, teleport from one region of the world to another which isn't loaded, we have to initiate an emergency load, which will basically stall the game, show up a little loading screen or something a little bit more elegant than just a dead game, submits the load and immediately consumes that request so that it can just basically not allow you to fall out of the world or show this crappy lot area. Unfortunately, we can't do it immediately or ahead of time yet, but that's going to be an area of research. So basically for each of those cells and what's in them, we have 2 scenes per cell. It's mainly to manage level of detail and complexity of data. First scene contains the high-res mesh as well as the first LOD. That's all split into 3 categories. So there's the persistent, the high level of detail, and the LOD 1. Persistent data is usually all of your dynamic actors, characters, things that can be easily represented, can't easily be represented in LODs because of their dynamic nature. That layer is visible extremely close up, as well as in the LOD 1 range. High-res layer is detailed version stuff that gets LODed. So that's stuff like buildings or cliff rocks, that sort of stuff. It's visible close up. It's not visible in LOD1 range. LOD1 layer is the lower detailed version of all that stuff that's in the high category. And that's visible basically a bit further away. Now, if I remember right, I didn't have the data there. So to answer your question before, so the cells each represent, I believe, 100 meters. So with that in mind, you can see that the persistent sort of range from one border of a cell to another, with a 100-meter range for a cell covered, you would have 85 meters of visibility for the highest level of detail until you then get into that cell. And so you've got, say, 185 meter radius of visibility for the highest detail. Now, it's for anyone that's worked with lotting, you may be used to it as a per asset sort of thing. It's important to note that our world chunks are lotted, not the individual items. So in other words, if we have, say, 500 or 1,000 rock faces in one LOD chunk, one map chunk, then that gets added to one LOD chunk. The entire cell is lotted, not the individual thing. That's all carried out in GenTools and basically batched together so that we get quite a performant sort of basis for the overhead of managing that, but as well as being able to basically just batch it all together, minimize draw calls, and just emphasize better throughput on the GPU as well.
Just to be clear, so you're saying if you had that cliff there, you have a low resolution of the whole cliff?
Yeah, exactly. So it'll basically combine every thing that it could possibly batch together under the one draw call, and also under the static maximum, which, sorry, trying to debate with myself if I want to go into this much detail. So basically there's a sweet spot for vertex stream submission on GPU. We try to basically keep within that sweet spot. So we basically make those consolidated LOD groups basically fit within those. So it'll split those and basically try to combine them however is going to work best. So it's also worth mentioning that each cell has a finite complexity, memory budget, that it basically tries to stay within that. The whole point of that is we can budget for stuff up front, and we always know our worst case and hopefully never have dramas based off memory consumption and maximum overhead worst case. Because we can basically say we always know that X number of cells around you are loaded, so that's a maximum, and the maximum amount of consumption that they each will have is Y amount of memory. Okay, so getting off of the more core system stuff and a bit more into the stuff that I found fun. So our lighting is predominantly outside and time of day based. The setup has a few tricks. So basically, first of all, the lighting doesn't actually follow the visual sun or the visual moon. It slows down as it approaches the horizon. So the actual light angle doesn't match physically where the sun goes. The reason for that is it avoids the expensive long shadows projecting through the multiple cascaded shadow maps. So it massively reduces the worst case of having something over that side of the world trying to cast a shadow over this side of the world. But obviously it has the downside that you never get perfectly 90-degree long shadows, which in practice isn't actually a big deal. So we give the path of the, basically path of the sun or the path of the moon a slight curve. So we skew it so that it never has a completely down sort of angle, because quite frankly that's visually boring. We also allow the sunset and the sunrise to be abnormally long. So they're visually interesting, so we promote it. The ambient lighting is an interesting one. So this is more of a recent development. So that's supplied by a custom radiosity solution. I'll get into that in a bit. We piggyback off the Unity cascaded shadow maps, and we extend that with another term, which is based off of our proxy geometry. Our proxy geometry is from our furthest LOD, so it's very cheap. That gives us shadows from one side of the world to the other. So basically, we can utilize the Unity out-of-the-box cascaded shadow maps only for the up-close sort of range. And then we have another term which is piggybacking off of the radiosity solution that we have to basically give us freebie, basically freebie world scale shadows. So for our time of day, basically the painful part of doing time of day systems is usually getting good settings and data to drive it. So for Columbus this time around, we built the data set just absolutely 100% from textures. So it's texture driven, there's no number tweaking, no curves, it's really quick to iterate on. You can basically get some really nice looking results by mixing the types at runtime as well. So for instance, we supply a data set like that there. We change it per biome and per season. Or at least we allow the artists to change it per biome per season. So that means that if you're in the desert biome, you can have a much different atmospheric condition and through different seasons as well as through the time of day. Yep.
So did you have to write code that interpolates between the two textures when you're changing between the cells? Is that?
So what we do for the actual interpretation of the data is so offline we basically compile it into a just an array of color interps, and then we've got a composer which basically interprets that data set at runtime. So what the artist supplies, basically if you're if you're in the editor, it will automatically just convert it over. So that you don't have to click buttons or do whatever, and there's no overhead for the proper final build. So let's see if this will play. Nope. Should have used PC. Nope. No video. All right.
We can put that online later if you want.
Yeah, that's cool. So radiosity solution, I love radiosity. I really do. I would probably spend the entire duration of the project on it if I could. So I apologize. I tried to keep this not a wall of text. I've got some images after, not video. So basically, we made our own radiosity solution. It's custom rolled. So basically, the main reason why we didn't use, say, like Enlighten or Unity's stock stuff, mainly because it sucks. No, it doesn't. It's just not a solution which would work for such a large scoped, geographically game. We don't need to bake any data. Our solution is all runtime. So, there's no pre-baking, there's no waiting. It's all good. The other reason is because basically we want to control the final result, the visual result, in a non-realistic way. We want to abuse it, in other words. Now, I mentioned before that we use the same data set to do our distance shadows. So, being able to have the mountain far off in the distance over there, cast a shadow way over the other side of the world. That's an example of an abuse of that sort of system. It's a good abuse. but it's nearly for free because we're already, making that data. We're already basically spending the cost of rendering out our proxy geometry for it. That's something that you can't do with, say, a black box Unity system. You can't leverage the fact that you're already doing this other work and reuse those data sets. That's one of the reasons why we spend so much time doing our own tech and basically working on these things which are important either to the design primarily or the visual second. So for our solution, basically it's pretty simple, the sort of high level idea. So basically we gather it in a screen space buffer from light space data. So basically the input is we render low res, extremely proxy geometry of the world and key things like large buildings or say blocker proxies for the tops of trees that can get chopped down and that sort of stuff. We render that into a selection of albedo, so diffuse map sort of stuff, average vertex normals and the just a 16-bit depth buffer from the light's point of view. So we have all this information from the light's point of view, similar if you know about LPVs, similar input data. We then use that data, we gather in screen space based off of a pretty symmetrically constant gathering pattern for every point that you see on the screen. We're gathering the neighboring samples. So basically, from the hard to decipher paint image that I made on the right there, so we have the data from the light's point of view. We're seeing the screen from the camera's point of view. Basically, we can get the bounced lighting from, say, something that the light's seeing. So if we're tracing the green line, we can basically get the reflection vector from that up to the upper left side there. We use.
Where's the light? Where's the camera?
Oh, sorry. The camera is you. The light is the thing that's projecting these things. Yep. So basically, we use this rule, which is a two-sided propagation rule. It's common in some offline photon mapping techniques, where basically, if you have a light and it's shining down on this thing, obviously you don't want it to go through and hit the floor down the bottom. So, however, you do want to basically take the, say if this was red, you'd want to take the red and bounce it up with a cosine lobe. So, it's basically going in every direction like that, slightly biased because of all the index of refraction values of the surface. And you would then want to basically be spreading that and propagating that light and the illumination on the surrounding area. To do that, basically we propagate by gather. That's what the little plus represents. And we also do a negative light, which is totally wrong in terms of any physical sense, but due to propagation, it actually looks pretty sweet. We do that as a total pass-through. So basically, it does the equivalent of a fake shadow on the other side for occlusion and inter-occlusion based off the propagation basis. So that's a simple way to look at it. A better, simple way to look at it is light bounces. Bounces from one thing, hits another thing. That's really hard in general in computing because we usually don't have that ability to say, take this point of data and propagate it generally everywhere. And the same with the one next to it, and repeat that for the entire room. Which is why we do the gathering in screen space, and we're doing it from the light space data because the light space data is actually fairly low resolution. So it makes the problem a lot easier. So some actual results. So unfortunately, I didn't have time to capture video. Fortunately, we can't see video. So here's some examples. So these are just examples with no textures, no effects. They're just raw lighting. So this is a shot around probably before midday. So without the system, everything would be in shadow. Everything that's in shadow, would be pitch black. And we'd probably fall back to some sort of global ambient lighting, like most games generally have, unless they're baking a radiosity solution. But they always look rather flat, uninteresting. You get really rich lighting and something nice in direct light, but then if something's in shadow, it generally looks kind of flattish and not as nice. But instead, we get a lovely rich color bleed from surface to surface. So another example, this time sunset, I believe. So you can see that the distance and the angle of the origin surface, say like the grass down here, that's in direct light. The distance of that to the cliff face and the angle of the grass and the cliff, that's allowing a certain rule set to basically bleed that light onto the cliff. So it's getting tinted green by the grass, bouncing up and illuminating those rock surfaces. And last little example, you can see sunlight gets tinted by that green grass again. Light's bounced into the shadow areas. You can see there's like a kind of gradient of like the distance that propagation is being allowed to go in. There's a inverse square sort of law to kind of dictate how far that can bleed or bounce. You can also see like the blue of the water area is illuminating the area around it in that blue tint as well. So it's quite a pleasing sort of visual thing. So, yeah.
I was going to ask, it looks very beautiful, but like I can imagine it would have been a very long process trying to get it like to the specific sort of sweet spot, because it might look like radioactive stream.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those dichotomies of game development. Basically, it's a really basic rule set and a really hard problem. So thankfully, the problem is the technology side. So if you can solve that, then all you need to do is kind of adhere to the rule set. If you can adhere to the rule set, then you can also abuse the rule set. Pro tip, adhere to the rule set first. So yeah, in general, so when I start this sort of stuff, I'll do a reference plate. So that's like, something which is never going to ship. It'll probably never even run. It's something which is basically your ground truth. So you want something which is adhering to the rule set above and beyond, whatever the technology limitations are. You just want it to be like, this is the target. So yeah, just basically standard rendering term rules of like the radiosity algorithm, get that working. And as you develop, your actual final technology is, try to match that as closely as possible. Less trial and error that way, I guess, is kind of where I'm coming from. So moving on. So the weather in the game is event-driven. It occurs based off summed probability tables. Certain conditions apply in a bias, like what season it is, where in the world you are, how much cloud is about, all those sorts of things come together and form a chance of a weather event. So when an event kicks off, has a sequence which is driven by those conditions. Rain is a great example. Starts off slow, builds up. Clouds become denser, they lower their altitude to visually match what should have been there already, but we'll ignore that bit. And other things can eventuate, like critters taking shelter, or say, bugs finding shelter as well. Birds obviously don't like to fly around that much when it's raining. So there's always a chance of double rainbow afterwards as well, because we've got a very pretty game. So double rainbows for the win. Unified wind was a really interesting topic for us. Generally, wind is best as a subtle effect. Has a big impact on the whole living, breathing world side of the design. And this is a great example of where we're trying to emphasize technology and the investment of technology to basically have a payoff for the player experience, and also to adhere to and promote the design. So basically set up the global simulation, scales from like a low frequency ambient wind up to big blustery puffs. It gives us a basic physics building block. So at any point in the world, we can just rapidly sample, like, what is the force here? What is the acceleration here? For physics-driven elements, you simply integrate the force into the velocity of anything that you want it to do, and just let it do its thing. So for instance, no, that's in a video. Okay, I can't use that example. Damn. For example, a windmill. Sure, we could just animate or just have a constantly cycling windmill, but we've got this wind thing, so why not just say, cool, it's on a socket and we can rotate based off of force, and it's a small visual thing. Didn't actually take that long to set up, but it's interesting how many people notice. And they usually notice because they go, hey, that's turning and now it's turning the other way, or it's slowing down and it's rocking back and forth. It's just a lot more living and a lot better at basically selling the world as a living place.
Do you pre-calculate the wind equation for like when the
We do. We actually have a term which is derived, again, from the abuse of the global illumination system. There's two depth buffers which we derive in the global illumination system. One is from the light's point of view, the other is top-down. We use the top-down one for environmental lighting, which is generally what in offline rendering is referred to as global illumination. So that is the scattered light from the atmosphere lighting the world, as opposed to the direct light of the sun lighting the world. So basically we use that visually as a accessibility to the sky sort of term. So basically, from this point, how much stuff around me is occluding this area? At any point, you can get a percentage. You can say, cool, it's 20% occluded, or it's 100% included because I'm in a freaking cave. That also is abused, as we like to do, for just accessibility for weather. We use that for snow masks, we use it for wetness masks, and we also use it to occlude wind. So how much wind can actually get into this area. So if you imagine if there was a tight alleyway or a passage sort of thing, then it's going to have maybe 80% occlusion because it's got these two things on each side, but there's still a slight slice upwards where it's got a slight amount of visibility to the elements. So basically, in that sort of situation, it's a positive thing and a negative thing because you want a funnel wind. Luckily, we don't have many alleyways.
So the next step is to model a UV flow map.
Oh, don't say that. So basically, it works pretty well, but there's limitations like that. It gives us a great global sort of scope query for just how occluded this is or not.
So if you actually wanted that funnel, what's the easiest solution to just kind of have an override zone to say, no, this is an alleyway, we're going to modify that global setting, or would you kind of write a better tool to find those spots?
Firing from the hip, I would say if there's one alleyway, then I would do a volume basis. If it's a open world city game, I would probably say a pre-baked flow map, which is exactly what Tim was referencing. So for stateless things as opposed to physics-driven, things like animated cloth, vegetation, all those common things in open world games, what we do is we sum up a few different wavelengths of the force, and we apply different drag coefficients to each of those wavelengths, and that gives us one final global wind offset variable. That's kind of important because things like vegetation, you've got a lot of it. You don't want to store what my current simulated wind position actually is. So you need a stateless way to do that, something where you're not tracking the state over time. Generally, that's everything that goes through the GPU. So basically, we can just apply that global offset value because it's carried over a few drag offsets. We can pretty dodgily but effectively just apply it to a simple weighting mechanism. So you're giving it a phase, so over time, where you're at, and how much in amplitude. It's quite effective in the end, as you would have seen if this video would run. But it doesn't. So next up, ambient occlusion probes. So these are kind of interesting. They're a little old hat now from our probably became popular, I would say, in Last of Us, so the original Last of Us. What are they? They're basically ambient occlusion volumes, so they're localized proxy shapes to have the effect of lighting occlusion in an area. When I say a proxy shape, you can basically model any analytical shape that you can define mathematically. So a box, a sphere, a capsule, whatever you want, really. If you've got the math to define it, then you can model it. It's a lot better than a blob shadow. And depending on how you implement it, just as if not more cheap. So consider that even in mobile. And they play nicely with baked or screen space AO as well, because you can integrate both of them at the same sort of stage in your renderer. So they're pretty much the same setup and requirements as a deferred light, except you can do them a little bit more on the cheap. Now, bear in mind this is how we've implemented them because we have this data available. You can also do it just at your, so say in a forward renderer, you can basically have a summed array of them and just iterate over that per fragment as well. You could do it, what's a good example? There was a earlier Unity game, Shadowgun or something, I think it was. Does that ring a bell? Anyway, they basically did a similar sort of setup, mobile, low tech. They did it vertex based on a little proxy mesh, which basically follows the character's feet. And they basically integrated a few of these proxy shapes for the body, so that you would have soft occlusion, contact shadowing, and for the lighting, around where the feet contact the ground, and then softer, broader range stuff for the torso and the head. Sorry, tangent. So basically, we do it in a more deferred style way. So similar to deferred lights. Depth and normals are the input. You draw some bounding geometry in the area that you want it to affect. When the camera's outside of it, you're back face culling the geometry. When your camera's inside of it, you're front face culling. So when you're inside of it, effectively comes a full screen pass, which obviously isn't optimal. So you can optionally stencil it to minimize that fill rate. On write, there's a lot of ways to skin this cat. Again, you can multiply, minimum blend, or integrate into a ambient buffer if you've got it or using it. Very versatile is basically the takeaway there. Of course, you'll also need an analytic AO term in the shader. So the actual sphere proxy is really simple mathematically, so it's cheap. Having said that, you can extend it. So different proxy shapes is an obvious way to extend it. Ellipsoids are a fantastic way to build up more accurate casting sorts of proxies. So for example, if you've got a simple way to bind, different capsule or ellipsoid shapes to, say, bones, then you can easily model a fairly rough approximation of a skeleton. And that's only for accuracy, really. So you can also derive occluded disks from, like on the point of contact of the surface. And then you can use that as a projection term into like a more complex ambient or lighting rig setup. So for instance, if you had the occluding disk and a spherical harmonic set, then you can cast into that set and get the directional occlusion as opposed to just a flat black shadow sort of style occlusion. In layman's terms, that means if you've got a world which has got a various gamut of colors and lights coming in from all different directions, and you've got something blocking it, if you've got a red light here, you're going to block the red on this side. If you've got a blue light here, you're going to block the blue on that side. It's a lot more accurate, it's a lot more pretty. And that would be a video.
Why don't you try to play it outside of the presentation?
Yeah, we can try to either put it back on and play some of these, or we can probably publicize the slides later as well. Yeah.
There's an update button in Outlook as well, saying that it's outdated here or something like that. So it might be that.
And we can go back and visit the videos too.
Yeah.
Let's give that a quick try. Looks like there's only 8 videos.
That sounds like a good number.
Yeah. It's in the ballpark.
We may have video. No, we don't.
Right, yeah. Bugger.
That's okay. Let's say from current. Okay, so one of the other big things for tech for us is basically being informed about our game and the development of it. So a big thing for us is our debug suite. Now, a lot of people are used to using Unity and having certain debug tools available which are inbuilt, so say just simple profiling or whatnot. Others may be used to more low-level API, low-level hardware, so things like SNDebug, things like that. Those are great. This stuff doesn't replace those. Sorry. This stuff is more for triaging at runtime. It's more for figuring out what your game's doing, and it's stuff that every developer should consider best practice before making your game. So basically we made a lot of this stuff early on, and it grew with our needs. So we get so much mileage out of this stuff being accessible in test builds. So say for instance, if we're basically doing a playtest with some kids and they do something crazy, we can figure out what they've actually done. Very important. It's also really important while you're testing things to be able to quickly triage and summarize where things are going wrong, where things are actually working right. We conditionally compile these things out of our full builds though, just using the define symbol interface. So first example of our debug suite is a runtime CPU timings. So it's nowhere near as detailed as the Unity profiler, but it's really quick at giving us a good look at performance in runtime. Basically, we track all of our components, we capture data or so live data, so we don't do any sampling, we don't affect the performance as you're profiling it. Really what it's there for is to quickly triage issues. So if you're running around the world for the last 5 hours in the game, something goes wrong then and there, you don't have to attach, you don't have to have been running a debug build to start with. You can immediately look at what's happening. This would be a video, again, showing you how effective and amazing that is. Another debug suite example is the actor information. It's another quick use tool. This time it's for investigating the information on actors at runtime. So this is something that anyone making a game with a stable foundation should be considering as just a basic interface thing, because it's super easy to make. So all it does is draws information on the screen at the position of an actor. So say, for instance, the player, a tree, the rock that you can pick up. All these things are all derived from one of our base classes, which is our actor classes, which is kind of why I went over that stuff about foundations before. Really simple, just draws contextual information about what's currently happening with that thing. Video. Good example for this is we have harvest points. A harvest point could be a rock wall with a crack in it with some minerals, and you can mine that crack with your pickaxe and those minerals disappear. Still has a crack there, you still know that it's a mining resource. Another one is something which you pick off and it's gone. So you visually cannot see that actor anymore. You cannot see that harvest point anymore. Actor information is kind of useful in that sort of situation where if something's happened and you can't see the thing anymore, you can at least get all the state info. You can get the state info outside of the editor, so you can get it at runtime, you can get it on a test kit for whatever platform. It's not linked in or tied in with, basically you being in a situation where you're ready and willing to debug things. Okay, something a bit more fun again. So light behaviors. This is a really lightweight interface for lighting effects. How many people here are actually using Unity? Pretty much everyone, give or take, 90%. So if you're using Unity, if you've been doing a decent amount of lighting, you'll know some of the limitations. So for instance, I think they've got a slider which only goes up to 8. Which for HDR rendering is pretty bad. The value of white can definitely go above 8. This is a really lightweight example of extending those things and adding common interfaces. So turns out that you can just multiply the color and assign the color back to the light, and hey, presto, you've got however large of a value you want to apply to your HDR rendering.
Like when they switched it to half it, so it's something to
Yes. Unity. We love you.
in the interface you had a 16, but the moment you touched it, it snapped back to 8 and could never go back to 8.
Oh.
Not even in script.
Okay, well that's just giving me more clout with saying this. Okay, so as a shared interface also, basically you can add different behaviors to it, hints in the name, light behaviors. So things like common flickering, that you have a candle versus a light, like an artificial light, which is flickering on and off. these sorts of interfaces are really useful for basically just having reusable, context-driven and content-driven ability to add these things really rapidly. So we can describe those sorts of behaviors really rapidly through these sorts of common interfaces. For our usage as well, we have the whole idea of treating things as a nighttime only light, so that, say, village lighting only comes on at nighttime, which is kind of useful. And also we try to simulate the square distance fall off for scaling the radius by the luminance change. So for instance, if you've got a light which is, say, the flames from a fire, and that's pulsing and changing color, it'll actually be, scaling the distance as it's doing it, because the brightnesses and the intensities are changing as well. Lighting in the real world, you never set the distance on a light, you only set the intensity. There's a good reason for that. In games, there's an equally great reason why you set the range of a light, generally performance. But yeah, obvious reasons it's not very realistic. So that's a way to get around like that sort of description of lighting as a common thing. Video. All right, so I think this is the last tech thing that I'd like to go over and present. So anchored UVs. We basically use this for pretty much every effect that we do. So it's a pretty useful thing for us. So basically it's a way to project a 2D texture onto objects using that texture anchored in world space. So it's kind of like a virtual billboard for that object. It's really useful for particles and effects especially, because you can use it to add extra details and control a whole heap of different stuff on a particle or a particle group, since it crosses the particle's boundaries. So that image there, obviously, you've got some pretty horrendous particles, but you can obviously see that that texture is striding the boundary and going over all of them. So this texture flows from one particle into another. So that's a really important thing to get connected and cohesive looks with your effects. So this is super useful for that. Now, unfortunately, the biggest thing here to explain and show that is a video. If this was running, you would see amazing basic particles on the left, which are boring. They have a single color, and they change from being a fiery, whitish, bright HDR through the gamut of lovely yellows and oranges, and finally out to a smoky transition at the end. Looks horrible because basically it's only one consistent color. You obviously wouldn't usually do that. You would have a texture to define it and try to either go through a flipbook or some other sort of form to describe those changes over time. However, with a anchored UV setup, we can just use one of those textures to basically project onto the whole group of those particles, modify the density of, when those transitions happen, and so you get a nice fluid. Oh, geez, that's not even. There we go.
You're standing on the cable there. I don't know if that's.
Oh, might have been blocking the pipe. It's like a garden hose. So yeah, basically that changes those transition timings, and one particle moving away from another doesn't really affect that fluid sort of motion that you get using this sort of setup. And then the last one, we're also using that same data to distort the base UVs, and because it's distorting it all in that projected space, you get that beautiful gassy sort of flow through it all. So trust me, it's pretty. And it's also actually fairly cheap. Now, I'm not going to really go over this, so maybe take a picture if you really want to know. Or we can, watch the video. We'll probably have, we've got the original Unite conference talk of this already upline, so you can Google us, you can grab that. It's got this info in there still. I'm sure we'll probably publish this updated version as well, so just search for Prideful Sloth, you'll find it.
We'll link anything on the meetup side as well. So.
Okay.
Yeah, cool. Yep.
So how do you just moving these particles along one plane? Is that the idea?
So yeah, in general, we project from like a clip space through and anchor in world space. So like, if you think of the anchor as like, the pivot. So basically from that pivot, you can then scroll in world space. So, if you're scrolling along the general direction that like, your particles are, or even the opposite direction to try and get like a inverse sort of caved thing like smoke does from cooling thermodynamics and that sort of thing, looks pretty cool. Otherwise, you can just basically rotate around the pivot, or have multiple layers distorting one after the other. Basically, it's up to you how you want to really drive those things. We just end up using vertex colors through the particle system to just define that data over time and give it like, usually either a scroll or a rotation, just to get momentum and movement through that. Only thing to note is Unity's changed how they basically build their particle geometry with Shuriken now. So it no longer lives in camera space. I believe all their geometry is now in world space. So you can possibly just transform the particle geometry. No, actually, you wouldn't need to. You should be able to just grab the actual object space point of origin if that's what you want to anchor to. Otherwise, you can always define one yourself like we've done here. All right, so the takeaway for tech and tech investment. So basically, invest in tech where it counts and only where it counts. Save time, expedite your development. Basically, you want to reinforce design and art direction. Don't just do what I do and make things because they're cool. Do it for a reason. Some of my stuff isn't cool. Basically, invest in things which are going to actually be useful to the user. So if the user is your development team, then that's a big deal. That's things like Gen Tools, where you can basically take away a lot of mouse clicks, a lot of monkey tasks. Basically, if it's going to be to overcome other limitations in your pipeline, then that's also a really solid and viable goal. So yeah, try and concentrate and focus on those things. Next thing is basically, debug is great. Setup we used has been really helpful. It's just immediately accessible and easy to use. So basically at any point running the game in a test build or out in the field at some sort of conference or event, we can just show something on screen and figure out what went wrong. You don't need to have an environment set up where you're ready and willing to go to debug something. You can basically call it on demand. Automation is the biggest winner though. So your time is the most valuable thing you have. Basically, my recommendation for that is really, just take a step back every now and then. Ask yourself, can a process be faster? Can it be better? Can it be automated? The surprising answer is usually yes, it can be. Even if you're just accenting other areas of your development. if you can take away the first painful 10%, or even the majority, 90%, and just leave the 10%, then that's obviously a huge win to not only your game and how you're building it, but also your personal life, because you're not going to be basically wasting it doing all those monkey clicks that you really don't need to do.
That leaves us with art.
Can I jump in with a question?
Yeah, go for it.
No, not you, go ahead.
This might be slightly mean, because that's what I do. It seems to me like you have three major components to your tech. There's the basic stuff that is like, make it run efficiently. There's the automation stuff, which is kind of like, let's save time.
Yeah.
And there's the, let's make it pretty.
Yeah.
And the first two of those are fairly easy to justify in terms of like, you can estimate or you can measure time, as in, how much are we saving on this? Is this worth it?
Yeah.
How do you justify the third one? Have you run tests on your target audience kind of with and without the prettiness to see if it's really worth it?
So one of the tough ones with that, especially in terms of justification, is you can never really justify that stuff up front without building it.
No.
So at the point where you're then doing like, target testing, it's generally stuff that's going to, by definition, need to be like, well, we're sitting on the fence on this thing.
Yeah.
It's a hard one on that sort of side, which is probably why we outright ignore it. Usually, you need that answer up front, I guess is where I'm coming from. So you need to at least be able to justify it through art direction and the viability or the expense of the development investment. So those are the two main things that you need to take into account when setting out on those things. So obviously, especially if things are R&D or complete cowboy pew-pew invention, it's an impossible task to say, oh yeah, cool, this thing that I don't know if anyone's ever solved. Yeah, cool. Let's do that. It'll take us a month.
It helps though that you've got a lot of previous background experience. Like someone starting out new making games is gonna have to climb over a lot of hurdles to learn how to do all this stuff.
Yeah. So, and I think, that's where it becomes difficult, because a lot of roles are going to be drawing from experience in that same way to be able to just get a sense, basically a gut feel for this is going to work, it's not, what are the benefits versus any detrimental thing for time investment or taking these people away and focusing on this thing. A lot of that is definitely gut feeling, but it's all about risk mitigation. So basically if you can justify it through this is going to significantly impact the outcome and the intent of art direction, or this is going to significantly benefit us for design or presentation or marketing, then those are the things that you've got to basically take into account.
It seems like a lot of it would also really come down to you as an art director. Like that's the kind of make or break between someone who has a better vision and someone who maybe doesn't.
Yeah.
Picking those, because I always think about it as like kind of bang for your buck moments where you go, I'm going to put this effect in. It's a little bit indulgent, but I'm actually going to get way more out of it than the tech cost of it.
Yeah.
And if you make a few of those, you're kind of ahead of the game, because you can. I always think of it as like. If you can make something that's very flashy and very cool, that's not that difficult to do. It's buying a little bit of space everywhere else.
Yeah.
So that's the trade-off, and that's what you're kind of.
Yeah, it's definitely a good way to look at it.
Yeah.
The other thing to jump in and interject on this too, though, is most of these systems that you talked about were built before development started. So these were actually all part of our vertical slice. I think there's probably some changes and better implementation on things like Shadow that were done.
Yeah, definitely.
But this is basically part of what we did to make the game look as beautiful as possible in order to sell it. So that's, that's a real consideration too. You can say, I can hold back and maybe not do those things, but then you have to consider what is the person reviewing your game going to say. And unfortunately, we're in a climate where money is out there, but money is not the easiest thing to secure anymore, and it's not based off of an idea, it's based off of execution now, and so you have to over-execute in order to sell. So.
All right,
Art, business, and GDC. Now, I know we're kind of right at time now, so how long do you have the room? We can keep going.
Just keep going, but how does everyone feel? Because I think there's a lot of content here. We could easily have you guys back for another talk. Does everyone keep going? It's up to everyone else, really.
I'm happy to keep going. I love
Wait.
talking about business, to be honest.
Yeah.
all right, let's do the hand show again. So yeah, BizOps,
Yeah.
business.
Okay.
All right, what else do we
Art.
have? Art,
And then GDC.
GDC. Cool. Honestly, I think business.
Okay, so we can
Which is
get
next?
straight in.
Yep.
All right, so back to me talking for a little bit now. We'll give you a break from Joel. He loves tech. So we refer to BizOps. We call it BizOps because it's not just about biz dev. It's not just about studio management, and it's not just about business management. It's the entire suite of things. That's our word for it. So I didn't personally write the huge and extremely important topic. That was Joel. It is, but I see it differently, I guess. So really, we focus on 3 areas. Business management, so it's the setup, the company, the structures, the legals, the financials, all those things to actually make a company a company. It's the development of it. It's the pitching. It's the relationship management. It is dealing with all the outsourcing, talking from that side from a vendor point of view. It's also the internals. It's working on schedules. It's working on budgeting, reporting, and making sure that everything stays on track to milestones, all the fun stuff there. So the business management point of view, it depends on what you're going to do, how big your company is, what your goals are, and how many people you have that can take on these roles. But there's a lot of different hats to wear, and take your pick which ones you want. I get a lot. Managing director, payroll, finance, secretary. I like being a secretary. HR. I also have access to the bank account. Money's mine. So if anybody runs away, it's going to be me. But again, there's a lot of things to do from the minute you decide, especially again on the console, on the PC and mobile app side, I can't speak to, but from a console point of view, the minute you want to start putting an app out there, incorporating your company, you have to have an ABN to start setting up and getting developer registration access. It's just a must-have. So that's company structure. How are you going to start now? How are you going to grow? Some people start off with what do I need right now, but then you find out later there's a whole bunch of growing pains in rejigging your company, adding new people, changing the structure. So what do? Do you sort of go the aspirational route, spend a small amount of money now and set it up correctly for the future, or do you set up what you need right now and then spend a large amount of money later to fix those things that might need to be changed? Taxation setup. Are you going to do GST? I hate vast statements. Yes, we do GST. How are you going to deal with, if you decide that you're going to take people on, if you're going to pay shares, are you going to do dividends? How does that work? Are you going to pay super? Was that a stretch or a question? Go for it.
Sorry to interrupt, but it's curious, you're raising for GST, so I was thinking that the store may take the GST from the buyers, so you don't have to declare that. So how does work really?
So, I mean, from our point of view, while we're not necessarily selling anything yet or worrying about that, we still have purchases which collect GST. So, if I need to buy a computer, I pay GST on it. So I have to keep track of all that. My accountant deals, or his team of accountants under the main accountant, they deal with the forms because there's only so much overhead I want to deal with. And I really don't want to know how a BAS statement works. I probably should. but they do it, so I just make sure it's all logged. But it's up to you whether you want that money back or not when you make those expenditures. But at that point, then you're committed to doing a statement every 3 months as well too. So you need to make it worth your time. The setup, if I'm only gonna have a couple $100 that I've paid in GST, it's probably not worth your time yet to do it, because by the time you've covered the time to track everything, possibly either doing it yourself, so that time to fill it out, or paying somebody else to do it, how much does that add up to be? But we set that up earlier so that it was in place and ready to go for the future. So we took that on earlier. Again, just all the different taxation setups that you might need. Employer requirements, again, getting contracts. Are you overseas as a contractor? Are you internally are you a sole trader? Are you internally, are you a business? There's a number of just different, requirements that we've had to set up. And even though it says employee contracts as well too, it's also dealing with the externals, third parties in their legal agreements. When there's multiple people involved, you need to start thinking about shareholders agreements. What's going to happen if we all decide we hate each other one day? How does the company deal with that? You can write it down on the back of a piece of paper, or you can formalize it. We want to make sure that it's formalized because, again, we're protecting ourselves from ourselves, and we're protecting the company for its future regardless of how we choose to manage ourselves. So there's a lot there as well. So again, we jumped into this early on. One of our first goals was to be a company, not 2 people, not 3 people developing and making games. Our aim is to set ourselves up for the long term, not the short term. So we had a lot of things we've had to learn very early. Again, we formalized the company because we needed to register. We need to claim expenses for BAS and other things. R&D credits. Again, you need to be a company. You need to have a certain amount of money that you spend in order to start dealing with your R&D tax credits. Business banking. We needed to have the company set up correctly so that we could get a business account, because let me tell you, and unfortunately I've been doing this, running your business out of your personal bank account, it gets really messy really friggin' quickly trying to remember where everything went and how much was what. You really need to separate those if you can early on. So again, then we started to explore, what the funding paths were available, and we needed a company to do that because, again, you need to be taken seriously. People, I'm sure there's stories out there of people, one guy that managed to sign funding and that works. But again, too, for the most part, when you're dealing with big people, you need to present yourself in a structured and formalized way. So again, we shopped around, and these are the main areas that we looked at. Accountant is invaluable, and they will babysit you, and they will hold your hand, and they will take every stupid question you have to ask, because I don't know the first thing about bookkeeping. I don't know the first thing about setting up a company, so our accountant had to help us through all of this. Legal advice. This is really important and something to consider. You should find a lawyer before you start getting contracts. We unfortunately didn't do that, so when we got a contract, suddenly went, oh, this is real. We need a lawyer to review the contract. That took a little bit of time to get that set up as well too. So find a lawyer sooner rather than later, and consider putting them on retainer, because again too, it's all nice and good when you're paying people per a milestone or per an invoice. Your lawyer, you kind of want there if the money dries up to help you sort out why the money dried up and go back. So consider retainers for your lawyers. You want them there for the long haul, not for until the money dries up. And again, mentors and advice. We've looked at many mentors. We're looking at more. They're there to help you through. There's so many people who've been setting up for years that have been doing this. We've come back to a new environment about what being an indie is. We missed the entire collapse of the Australian games industry. We jumped over to the UK and continued to work. So there's people that have been paving, and I'm sure it's probably a number of you here today that have been paving this route for 6 years that we were still getting paid to work for somebody else. So that what everybody's learned in those 6 years, we're taking on board, and we're seeking that advice back, because there's a lot that's been built up in knowledge in the communities. So don't ever Absolutely. Talk to your peers, talk to other people who've been doing it, talk to people who maybe you're from, and living in other countries too. They might have a different approach to it that you don't know about. So if you have access to them, utilize everybody that you can. So in terms of the developing of the business, we spent a lot of time researching, and that's where some of that 7 months went to. We were looking at trying to understand what the landscape was when we came back. It had changed, we left, right before Chrome went down, pandemic had closed, but THQ was around. So it's very different to us when we first stepped back a year ago. And there's 100 little companies now as opposed to 3 or 4 big companies. So, we wanted to learn what the local scene is and also how that is impacting what people are able to do with console development, with, mobile phone development to a lesser extent. It's not really our forte, but, learning about that. So we found that there's a lot of opportunities in that. We've found, like I said, plenty of people who've spent 6 years growing small companies up that can give us advice. We've looked at the fact that there's a lot of small studios around now too that are filled with really talented people who ended up staying here. Some of us went overseas, but that talent still exists here, and it's great. And so we've learned to talk to all these different little groups of people, to figure out what's going on and utilize some of them. We took the path that we were told was harder and was less likely to even exist, which was we went more traditional funding route. And it does exist, which is good for us. That's why we're here today, and our bank account isn't at 0 anymore. That's always the best part. So what we did, though, to seek funding is we looked at who. It's who do we work with? Why does it fit there? And sometimes the opposite of why something fits with one person as opposed to another is an answer. You look at one person and go, this fits really well. Maybe it'll work. What's the negatives of that? Well, because it fits really well and they have other things that work like this, maybe they don't want it. The opposite, like I said, you look at somebody and go, okay, they don't have anything like this. So it's a great piece in their portfolio. It makes us unique, but maybe they don't want that there too. So pros and cons to everything. But while you're talking to companies, look at what your pros are, look at what your cons are, and consider approaching them. So we looked at people who were taking an interest in the types of games we're making. Where are some of these non-combative open world type games going now? Who's taking them on? Where's the money going? What's happening there? And we also looked at other opportunities from non-standard point of view as well too. Are there relationships that we can build from, say, a diversity route? What can we do to possibly work with those people as well too? So there's other partnerships out there other than just pure publisher partnerships. And yeah.
Can you explain the traditional funding model a little bit more? Is it like for publishers, you get an advance and they take a split of the final sales?
Yes, it's your traditional. It's basically what Chrome, Pandemic, THQ were all built off. You pitched, you sought your funding, you had milestones in which you had to deliver to continue to get your milestone payments through. So it's your tried and tested route.
And is there a sliding scale of what the split is between for what they get versus what you get?
It is, I can't speak for everybody. From ours, it is, it depends on how much the sales are overall, how much they take back. So again, everyone's different. I can't speak. Some might take less up front. Some we saw were happy to just do 20% at the very start and take that 20% the whole way through for funding. So, yeah, so very, very traditional. Like I said, back 7 years ago, really. That's what we were trying to do, is see if it still worked. So, and again, we looked at people in companies that we wanted to work with and how to foster those relationships with them. And when we say foster relationships, you cannot discount having a champion fighting for you in a company. If they love what you're doing, they will fight tooth and nail to see that you get promotions, you get publishing, you get money. They're there. So, those relationships can be really important, especially as a new company that's untested. So another part is all the fun stuff, as I call it. So we're all used to studio production management, but I mean, this is really, day-to-day management of what's going on, scheduling, outsource management, budgeting, projections of budget. It's staff allocations, making sure that we've got our contractors and other people that we want on board beforehand and ready to go, making sure that we have time to get what they need set up so they can start going, and really just making sure that we're ready to go for milestones. That milestone adherence build submission, that reads QA. That's another glamorous job that I get to do. I love it. Risk management, that's just inherently part of me. I am basically a pessimist, so I see the worst coming at all times, including in myself, which isn't so good, but that's, what's going to go wrong? What is the worst case scenario at any point? It's better, from my point of view, it's better to work on the worst case scenario than the best case scenario, because if you work on the worst case scenario, even if you're wrong, you're probably not wrong by a lot, but if you work towards the best case scenario, you can be wrong by a lot.
The flip side of that is opportunity management. Do you track that at all?
Opportunity management?
Yeah.
From the biz dev point of view, yeah. This is just really more about the internals as opposed to externals. So absolutely, though, from a biz dev point of view, we do track those. Again, as part of that, like I said, dealing with partners, publishers, investors. I get to do public inquiries. That's, again, I get to deal with the day-to-day press, emails, or whatever. Not that we've gotten too many yet, thank God. Social media, community management. Again, some of this we're offloading too, because let's be fair, I am not a social media expert. I kind of get Twitter, but I don't, and I don't get Snapchat. I don't really want to, so we're also seeking help in these areas, because the other thing that you always need, we're still navigating this. We've worked under NDAs and we've worked with studios that babysat us through these roles, or we didn't have to touch. So now we suddenly have to do all this, and we kind of need somebody to come in and babysit us again still, and make sure, because again, the social media side can blow up so horribly based off of something innocent, and none of us really want to go down that avenue. So we would like somebody to help us there. Again, marketing and publicity. This is, again, something that we're getting help with. We can make things really pretty, but we need help to market the things, because, again, that's a role that we've never filled before in the past. We have to do some of that ourselves, but it is a complete black art to us, so we need help with that. So again, this is the other side of some of the things we have to look out for. These are the hidden things that you may not have remembered when you started factoring in time and costs to your project. Writing submissions, those cost time, those cost money, those need to be done in advance. I haven't done any of them yet, so I don't know how far, but again, that's where we've talked with other people who have to help us figure that out. Again, QA, we think about it, but at the same time, are there ways to work around that? Can you do it yourself? Do you need somebody else to help? If so, how soon do you start engaging those suppliers? And given that those suppliers don't really exist locally too much, you're going to have to look overseas for that. So where are you going to look? What's the dollar value going to cost you in doing that? How much time is it going to take you to manage getting those builds over to them? Again, marketing and publicity in here. If you haven't factored it in, you really should. You can. I don't think it's... If you're lucky, you can get on the front page of Reddit, as that 16-year-old kid in Melbourne did with this really beautiful looking game. For the most part, most of us aren't going to get that lucky. So we need a way to find out how to help us communicate to the audiences we need. Again, international dollar shift. Let's be fair. We don't have a publisher. We have a few smaller publishers, but all of the big three, they're all overseas. We mainly deal with European territories. So they're not going to pay, you can probably negotiate. I won't say they won't. You can probably negotiate it, but for the most part, they're going to pay you in their territory's currency. So you want to make sure that you factor in what's going to happen with their dollar, what's going to happen with your dollar. We're getting paid in pounds, and unfortunately, one of the things, it's not terrible, but blindsided us a bit, is Boris Johnson speaking out about exiting the EU, and that's actually tanked the dollar a little bit. So fingers crossed they stay back in June. But unfortunately, we noticed this a bit of a hit in our first couple of payments out of that. So, you want to make sure that you're aware of the things that could happen. Boris Johnson being one of them. So, trade show costs. Again, I'm going to say this after having just been to GDC2, it's going to cost you more than you think it is. It's going to cost you more than you ever thought it was going to be. So, planning more money for trade shows. If you can sleep on somebody's couch, get free tickets, great. That saves you money, but it is more expensive than you ever thought it was. Post-support period. You don't just launch a game and you're done. So you need to keep your studio around, ideally, for the next 3 to 6 months after you've put it out. So that's a major cost that you haven't possibly thought of up until that point. So what after I'm done? Demo builds, we've all been there, I think, at some point where suddenly you urgently need to do a demo build. It is such a derailment to a project to throw everything into demo builds. So how can you manage those builds smartly, wisely, but also, are you going to need to localize that demo build? Are you going to need to QA that demo build? What is going on and what is the impact of that build? Are you stopping work to make that build suddenly? If you are, then you've just hit your production milestones and you've just tanked them. You need to factor that in at some point somewhere else that you then need to go back to actually producing rather than making a build. So again, are you going to do DLC and post-release? And if you are, then you need to consider your studio support and costs for that as well too. Especially if there's a bug, you need to QA it, you need help with that QA, possibly you need servers to run it, whatever that may be, there's extra costs that you possibly hadn't thought of there. And again, just general contingency, 15 to 20% is what I try to factor in. Whether it'll be enough, we'll find out. So those are some of the fun extras that we've actually thought of. And we projected out our scoping as best we could, in terms of what's our ramp up, what's our ramp down, when are we going to need people, one of the simplest ways we factored in some of the changes is when are the trade shows hitting? So E3 or GDC or Tokyo Game Show, start thinking about those being the things that are possibly going to put demo builds in and raise your costs. You're possibly going to want marketing at that point too. If you know that you're going to get it, you're going to, like I said, want your demo build QA'd if you're going to do that, or you might need to cut a video. So you need to make sure again that area is polished, whatever that may be, so that somebody can cut that build, that video for you. And again, then factoring in the future, what does an extra person cost you if you add them, if you need them? And, do you have enough money for it? And at what point, do you finally say, yes, we need that person? So this is some of the things we found out recently that we didn't account for. So this is our, what did we learn? Setting up payment terms with your contractors. You're not an ATM. You don't dispense money the minute somebody asks for it. Unfortunately, we didn't think of necessarily dealing with payment terms with some of our people. And we did get a question of, can I invoice you now? Can I invoice you now equates to, can you produce money for me now? So again, set your payment terms up front, 15 days to 30 days. We'd ideally like 30 days, but not everybody can sustain themselves for 30 days. So think about that as well too. But don't just go forward without a payment term. So turnaround for milestone payment drawdowns. This has been one of our more interesting current ones. So basically in where we're at, you have a 15-day approval process from the time you deliver a build to whether they sign off on that build or not. You then have 30 days from once that sign-off is complete before the invoice will be processed by payroll. Plus then at the point at which accounting, how much time after the accounting actually hits that button do you see the money in your bank account? It's at least 50 days. On a worst case, you take your best case, and if they reject your milestone for some reason, you then have 15 days to rectify it. They then have another 15 days to review it and approve it or not. So ad nauseum until you suddenly find yourself almost 3 months down the road at the earliest before you start seeing a payment for your milestone. So if you're working on milestone payments, you need to factor in your worst case scenario for how many months in advance do I need money when I ask for a payment. And then there's the wonderful one which we recently got, which is, oops, our accounting software is being updated. That added extra weeks to money coming into our account. Another one we didn't factor in is legal retainer costs, which I highlighted earlier. If you're gonna do it, keep your lawyer on for the long haul. Because like I said, you don't want your funding to dry up and then your lawyer to go with your funding dry up. You kind of want them there if in the worst case scenario, you want somebody there that's gonna help fight for you to get your money back. So, I think retainer is the only way to go with a lawyer. The other one we didn't really consider at the start was IP and trademark protection. We hadn't thought about the long term for what we're doing now. Is it viable? Is there something past now? Is there merchandising? And those are the things you need to ask yourself when you're making it. Are you just building a one-off, or are you building something bigger? We kind of thought we were building a one-off, but based off of conversations we've had, it may actually be bigger, and we need to consider what we want to do with that, and we need to consider it sooner rather than later. But that was money I didn't factor into our budget, and it's not the cheapest thing in the world to do either. Strengths and weaknesses. This is where your contractors come in, and this is where your mentors come in, and this is where you decide what you're going to pay for and what you're not going to pay for in your company. Basically, you need to be brutally honest with yourself about what your weaknesses and strengths are. You need to plug those holes with people who can balance them. And as we said, it doesn't just fall into place. You need to plan it. You need to think about it. You need to know it, and you need to be honest about it. It's not just going to happen. And it's a lengthy learning experience. It's a large time investment, and it is paying for that support. We know marketing, not our core strength. We need somebody there. We know social media. We know about it. It exists, but we also accept that there's a lot of good and bad that comes with social media, and we would prefer somebody more savvy than us to deal with that. Then it goes down to things about what you're doing about your own skill sets individually. This project is my brain baby, as I call it, and I have actually sat down and said, you know what, I need more support on the design side, because I'm doing all of this stuff, plus I'm trying to help with design, but also I realized whether I'm good enough or not, that's not the question. I don't feel good enough to be able to carry that design myself, especially for the future that it has. And I need support to do that. And that's in amongst the team, as well as bringing in other people to help balance that out. So, you pick those people that, the people that you're working with, pick them wisely, and pick really good people. Because the ones that are there are going to be there from the start to the finish. That's the ideal. So, really consider who you're working with and why. So, be that friends, family, people you pay, mentors who are going to help you. Make sure that you trust them. Make sure they sincerely believe in what you're doing. And that's, no lip service. You don't have room for that. And, abuse them, utilize them. It's something that I think a lot of people struggle with, which is asking for help and asking people for favors. When it comes to you and your business, and actually, do you want to live in a year's time, and do you want to have money in your bank account, or do you want to be eating ramen, and do you want to be the owner of a failed company? Those are your two options. Take advantage of everybody around you who will help you. Being realistic. So this is, what do you have? What are your resources? What are your finances? And again, back to the emotional. It is a really, really rough ride. And that's why it's okay to vomit in your mouth a little from time to time. You can, in the same day, get an email that says, you know what, there are so many things wrong with this project, we won't fund it. And you can get an email that says, we love this is the most amazing thing we've seen. How do you reconcile those two at the same time? It's a real struggle. And, for me, I'm getting used to the other side of it, which is the critique of my baby as well, too. And that is a really hard thing to get used to. And, sometimes how I deal with it, I would just curl up some days and just go, today is not a day. It doesn't exist. I'm going to have my mental day off, and I'll come back to it tomorrow. But you also need to be okay with setting a time frame for every emotion you have. Because ultimately we are adults, we are running a business, we don't have time for, somebody didn't like my thing. So, take it, set a timestamp on it, and then go back to being that adult again and running a business rather than being somebody who has taken something and internalized it and taken it personally. So, your mitigation risk. Plan A, Plan B, Plan C. Find as many outs as you can, because at any point this could fall upon you, and you need to be prepared for what's the worst case scenario at all times. I'm going and asking you. You had government funding, now you don't. They're trying to cut down on unemployment benefits and those sorts of things as well too. There's not a lot of helping hands right now, so you need to figure out for yourself what is your worst case and what can you do if you need to run, and how long can you deal with it before you need to run. And again, there's a lot of tools available that can help you streamline your processes and deal with things in a much nicer, easier way. We all use Skype, or at least I'm assuming most of us do. Skype is great. It's great for just chats, and it's great for phone calls, assuming your internet isn't a piece of shit. Yeah, I know, some of it is. The one we didn't think about, and we actually had to run out and get, was a phone that can conference with speaker. Because suddenly we had people who wanted to call us, because not everybody does Skype, and passing the phone back and forth between you doesn't work, so you need conference facilities. Dropbox has made our life easier by being able to store files. We've been using Subversion right now, and that's been great as a cheap starting point for us to get everything stored and source controlled. Then we have Bitly. I use Bitly because I want to know what's going on. Bitly allows me to see within reason who has hit a link I've sent them, and it also allows me to cosmetically change that link. So I can take a horribly long Dropbox link, tidy it up, make it something nice and pretty, and then I can also find out, have you actually looked at the thing I've sent you? And I have control with that link to tell it whether they can view it online or whether they need to download it. So Dropbox has, we found, garbled a lot of our PDFs when you tried to view them online. So we force, through our links that we send them, we force it to download the PDF so they have to view it locally. So there's little things like that that you can use to help. But BizSpark, if you don't know about this, you should. This is a lot of free software that you can, as far as I can tell, carry on into the future. If it's Microsoft and if it's on there, you have basically a perpetual license once the BizSpark program runs out. So, it's great. LinkedIn, again, that helps us figure out if you've got your permissions set right and you can see who's poking around, it's good to see. I want to know. I like collecting as much information as possible, so I want to know who's suddenly got a hold of our company deck and who's poking around and actually utilizing that information. Cheap unified hosting, this is one we put in because Joel had a website, I had a website, I had another personal project website, and we had the company website. We found it was actually easier just to do one hosting and host all of these websites on it rather than pay for all the hosting of all these different websites.
Are you making use of the Azure credits that come with BizSpark? Because you can do all hosting, you get $200 a month credit if they're still doing that.
I haven't looked at that side yet. The hosting we did first. The hosting we set up so that we had company email addresses before we knew about BizSpark. So right now we've sort of paid for the hosting. It is what it is, but I should take that on board and look at that.
If you want to deploy like an Azure web app, you can easily put like WordPress out, or there's a whole bunch of packages you can switch out, a couple of button clicks.
Oh, fantastic. So again, this is perfect. No, I don't know much about it, so I haven't looked at that side. But yeah, hosting is great. And again, if you can get the free hosting off of it, that makes it even better. Coffee, we've literally had conference calls at 1:30 in the morning. So that's been a necessity for us. But basically, again, through all the tools, speed, cost, and ease of use, you need to prioritize all of those. They don't always exist together, so you're going to have to take your pick of which you want sometimes. Again, you can, again, from project management point of view, I have yet to see a to-do system that I actually like. Task systems, there's a billion of them, and I really, no offense to anybody who's ever written them, but I just really don't like most of them. So, if somebody can write a great task system, that would be wonderful. So again, ease of use, we're looking for the best alternative on that for ease of use.
Are you using anything like Trello or anything like that at the moment?
We're using Trello, but where I'm considering going, so ideally, and again, it's up to everybody and what they want to do. I don't like Jira. That's a personal thing, and I think kind of as a company we've agreed none of us like Jira. So sorry for Jira lovers out there. I like Hanasoft, but again, and Hanasoft is actually free, but Hanasoft is only, at least from what I found from GDC, is only ever going to be on your own servers and your own systems, because Hanasoft would be nice for its integration for bug tracking further down the road with QA. However, that's not something we really want to do, is start having to do hosting locally, because that takes maintenance and time. When I went to GDC, I talked with them about, I think it's called Farvo, which is basically, to me, it's a little bit more Trello on steroids. So you can see multiple, basically the equivalent of multiple Trello boards, tag them with users so that you can filter by which user each board. So you can see, like 4 boards at once as opposed to having to go into one Trello board. And you can filter each one of those boards by different filters while you're sitting there looking at it. So we're going to investigate that a bit further and see if that's a better option. But yeah, we do use Trello right now, but Trello has a lot of limitations as well, unfortunately.
We're thinking about taking on board Jira. What is it that you don't like about that?
The setup. Jira's setup takes a lot of time, from my point of view, to do it well. Jira as a whole is a lot of clicks to enter tasks in and very basic stuff from my point of view. And Jira is very, again, it depends on how customized or how not customized you use it. But the minute you start customizing all your workflows, you need to maintain them. If they change, then you have to go back and update all your templates for your workflows. And I actually found Jira was harder to find information. That's just my personal take on it. I think I see a few other people nodding. So, but Jira just felt really hard to find information quickly.
It's very process heavy.
So.
Used it, but Hacking Plan is apparently pretty good. It's like Trello, but specifically for game dev.
Okay.
And it allows you to keep really good milestone goals.
Okay.
Stuff and plan that stuff.
Have you used it?
Not personally.
Oh, okay.
I've used it a bit. It's like still in development. It might be really good in a short amount of time,
Yeah.
but there's still some things which, like, it's really frustrating that they don't have.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I think it kind of sounds like every task system.
It's like at the opposite end of Jira, so it kind of forces you into a process. And if you don't want to use that exact process, I don't think you can customize it. Whereas Jira is, I think, probably at the other end of that spectrum.
Yeah. It'd be pretty basic. Like, you just put up a task up there and not add like a time estimate for everything. But yeah, I don't know. It was like, I think they didn't have like priorities or anything like that until like literally a few weeks ago. And that was pretty important for us. And you can't like sort them by anything.
But I think a task management system is probably an entire talk unto itself, to be fair. I really do. So again, some of what we've found out in using these tools, Bitly, like I said, use it to track your, use it as analytics. I'm sure there's something else. I'm sure there's plenty of other ones out there. But again, it's nice to know what's getting hit and where. We managed to send an email out to one person in the US and then found that we were getting clicks from Ireland and other places too. So we started to learn that they actually have people offshore that they were sending it to. The nice thing is we suddenly knew people were looking at our stuff. And it makes it nice to tidy up the URL. Again, it's just a vanity thing, but I think if it takes you 15 extra seconds to change blah to here's a link customized to Dylan, that feels much nicer for the time management that you get out of it, rather than just going here's blah and it takes up 5 pages of your email to get the link out. So BizSpark, again, as we said, you can get all your Microsoft software that you need. You can use Office 365 if you want it. You can use the hosting on it as well too. If you can qualify, grab it. It's really good.
You can run all your game servers and stuff on that as well. If that's the thing you're doing as well.
And so we've got, again, communication tracking. This is really back to ye old Excel spreadsheets. But who did you talk to? When did you talk to them? What did you talk to them about? How far did it go? Did you possibly use a generic email and then find that you got a person on the other end of the line that came back with a real email as opposed to a submissions at blah? oh, actually, Bob Smith has now emailed me. I'm going to keep track of Bob Smith. So in that way, it doesn't live in one person's inbox, and also 6 months later, a year later, or at the next conference. Go through that list, find those people, start emailing them, and start saying, hey, look, we talked a while ago, let's meet, because let's be fair, we don't see most of those people over here, and if we do, it's maybe once a year. So for the most part, you're going to want to start trying to meet those people. Even if they're not interested in what you have right now, talk to them. Build that relationship, because what they're interested in right now and what they're interested in later may change. So, use that list for all those sorts of things that you can. So again, so basically, our decisions to come back to Australia. Pros and cons in doing business here. I know our dollar is getting a little bit better at the moment as well too, but that may change. But the dollar being crap internally is great for people sending us money. That's really good. Compared to London, the cost and quality of life here, its cost is lower, and the quality of life is much higher. It's nice to see sun. It really is. And it's nice to see happy people. If you've ever spent any amount of time in London trying to go to work on the tube, it is basically the most soul-destroying thing you will ever do in your life, is watching a whole bunch of suits who don't give a crap about you or anybody else, and probably not their grandma, trying to get to their job as quickly as possible. They will knock you, they will run into you, they will not apologize. It's not a very nice thing. So quality of life, amazing. Sun is also amazing. Again, our internet sucks. I wish I could find a way that says that this is nicer. Sort of NBN is coming to some people maybe sometime. But look, there are workarounds though. You can get to some of these co-working spaces, River City Labs, if you really need fast internet to get a build up. Put it on a stick, go somewhere and get it up there. There are workarounds. None of these are ideal. Again, one of the ones we've worked with is trying to keep our build as small as possible at all times, so it makes it quicker to upload and download. Our upload speeds right now are abysmal, so that small build footprint is very nice. Our international hours, basically we get to do a lot of work before anybody emails us. It's quite nice because, if you're working in the same time zone, it's quite easy to reach out and interrupt at any point in time. So it leaves us here in our little bubble to work until almost the end of day before we get emails, or we log on in the morning and we get emails. And that's really nice because that gives us a good 6 hours a day to just focus on us rather than fielding questions and dealing with other things in general. Again, time zones, we're in the future. It can be annoying to deal with calls. Like I said, 1:30 a.m. conference calls, not the most ideal situation in the world. However, somebody sends you an email and goes, oh, hey, that company deck. And you're like, oh, company deck. Well, shit, I better research that and figure out what that is. Oh, here's a company deck. And they've had no time. As far as they're concerned, they sent you an email and the next morning it existed in their email. So, it is that sort of, here's one I prepared earlier. You take advantage of that where you can, to figure out quickly and turn around things and make it look like you knew what you were doing. So you've got a bit of time to become an instant expert and pretend that you know what you're doing. Again, we've got a really good community here. GFC destroyed most of what we knew when we left. But it's been an interesting, like I said, for us coming back after 6 years and seeing what everybody's already built up. It's amazing. People are talking openly and honestly about what's happening with their projects. There was not a point when we left that happened because everybody was under NDA and Chrome didn't talk to THQ or Pandemic so nobody really said much about what was really going on. We could all hint at it, and under it all, we kind of knew what was going on. But even within Chrome itself, I knew nothing about the financials, and I was on the production team. All I knew about was how many people were on my team at any one point. Now you can talk to other companies about financials and people can help you sort things out if you've got questions, and that's great. We all are willing to talk. And again, as we all know, this is all happening despite funding. So maybe it'll come back. I know that there's been some Obviously they've been doing the thing lately, the thing, yeah. The Senate inquiry, thank you, that's the word. So maybe it'll come back, but what everybody's doing here, they're doing it on their own. They're not getting handouts, especially up in Brisbane, up in Queensland, even compared to what the benefits are of Victoria. Anybody that's here and is making a game is doing a really fucking brilliant job because they've done it themselves without support. And so this is my GDC slide. Oh no, it's not. And it's the next one. So this one, this is right. This is social etiquette. Sorry, next one's GDC. This is the stuff we've had to learn. Changing the way you speak or type. Words like may, try, attempt, those don't really bolster anybody. They don't make you feel like you're dealing with somebody who knows what they're doing. You say you're a 10-year veteran, and then you say you can attempt to do something, you might do something. They go, well, is that who we want? So you need to be you need to change your language and be mindful of that and get somebody else to proofread and look for these words that aren't solid. You want to remove anything that's ambiguous or anything that's a little bit wishy-washy out of your language, and it's hard to do. Again, turning no into a positive experience. This is where, once you get over the fact that somebody has told you some very horrible things about your baby, you learn from it. You sit there and go, well, okay, why did they say that? What is it that I can take away from it? What is their frame of reference that they gave that feedback under? Talking with Microsoft, you're going to get a different perspective on a game than you are talking with Nintendo. They have very different development philosophies internally, and so they review those things in different ways too. So, like I said, put yourself in the frame of reference of the person who's reviewing it and take that into account as well too. When you get feedback, this is you really need to address things. But again, stay in touch. No doesn't mean never. We've been talking to people for 8 months now, and we still have people that we have really wonderful relationships with. We still have a champion in a company that's not the company that's funded us, but still likes the project. So, that's invaluable. Don't lose those people. You want those people on board. Again, don't carpet bomb people when you're pitching. Take the time to think about who you want to work with and why, because you're more likely to target the right people if you spend a little bit longer talking to them, and you can then figure out, what am I tailoring when I pitch to you? What are the types of games you do, so that I can sit there and, like I said, go back and review and figure out what it is what are the things that across the board all their projects have in common, and make sure that you highlight that thing that your project has that fits into their portfolio of all those other projects that they do. It allows you to personalize, and it allows you time to think about why you want to work with them as well too. And I know it's hard. Don't be afraid to talk to people. Even if you're not prepared. Again, you've got the ability to become the instant expert. You've got here's one I prepared earlier. But you can also start feeling out things and talking with people from a high level. You don't necessarily have to have everything ready at the start. Start talking, if you know somebody that's, starting, a company that's starting up publishing, make friends with them, even if you don't have anything to publish, because in a year they might have a lot of money to give you. So, don't be afraid to talk to people just because you don't have everything in order straight away. The you only have one shot is a common fallacy. It's not always true. It depends on what they think of what you're doing and how you've approached them and dealt with them to that point. They might come back and say, this, instead of just outright saying, no, I didn't quite understand this. Okay, give us a day. We can get a better representation of that for you then and get it back in your hands. And that that happens, and it's good if you can do that and do that quickly and keep them constantly engaged, because it also shows that you're addressing concerns that they have and that you understand your own systems enough to address them quickly. And, again, there's no harm in putting out feelers or engaging in an introductory chat. That sort of ties back into just really, you never know what's going to happen in the future. So keep in touch with people. And just talk with them. Like I said, even if it's high level, hey, I'm only working on a concept now. I'd like to come back to you in 6 months' time or in a year's time when this is more solidified. But what do you think of the concept? Would you like to know more when I'm in a position where I can show you more? Those are things that you can start talking about early on. More than likely, the concept isn't going to get you very far in terms of their engagement, but it gets you enough to know if you should come back later to engage them. So that's pretty much it. Do you want me to just go into the GDC slide quickly then? It's the next one over. Perfect. Why not? Everybody looks thrilled. GDC. This is for me, this is my first GDC. I've never been there before. So in order to make it to GDC, I got some money from Scrum Queensland to cover hotels, flights, all the other bits that I needed to get over there. I also managed to get an all-access GDC pass from the GDAA, which made my trip fairly inexpensive and very valuable to me because other people were helping me get there, so I took it a little bit more personally rather than, parties, yay, which is also part of GDC, depending on what you go for. I went with a very business-focused mindset, so my mileage from GDC will vary greatly to somebody who's just going there to enjoy it or learn from it, because I made it to the workshops on Monday and Tuesday, and I made it to no talks. I was busy. So what I found was not prepared for, but became an instant expert, is being prepared to pitch your projects or what you're working on at any time. Have those materials on your laptop, have that. I ended up pitching to Paradox while we were walking to grab a cup of coffee. I didn't realize I was pitching, but ultimately I was. When they say, "Oh, so tell me about your studio and about your game," you don't know when that's going to come up. So you need to be prepared to talk to these people. If you can get an all-access pass, your talks are going to be recorded for later, so that you don't necessarily need to attend them, and you can focus on the things that are immediately there in front of you and the things that might have occurred that you otherwise would have missed because you're in a talk. Now, the talks are great, and I don't want to, dismiss those either. But, if you can watch them later, that's great. Sorry, Tim, I didn't attend your talk. But so it's great for service providers. I met up with a lot of localization, QA people as well too, because again, it's somebody that I can't really talk to here. So I tried to talk to as many of them as possible while I was over there, because it was kind of my one shot in the next year to have a face-to-face meeting and start understanding who I might be working with, rather than by email. So what else have we got? It was interesting to talk with some of the foreign market publishers. China and Japan, there were a few around, and so those are some interesting contacts for later, depending on if heading towards the Asian market is what you want to do. But I believe places like China and Japan, you pretty much need something internally as a business address there to publish anyway. So those can provide a really good starting points for you for discussions. An odd one is I know there's this talk about business cards or not, but people notice the quality of your business cards, especially when they're better than their own company's business cards. When you talk to somebody from EA or Ubisoft and they have one of those thin floppy cards and you hand them a nice thick card, they will notice. So it's not much, but the quality, again, it's that presentation part of how do you want to present yourself. And so we went for quality on our business cards, and it was noticed, which was a surprise. Great branding makes you memorable. That was something that I stumbled across and didn't realize. I went shopping, so I visited my family a week before GDC. I found a shop, and I got that sloth bag up there. That sloth bag introduced me to some of the biggest media companies that you can get, because they saw the bag, liked the bag, thought it was cute, and then started an entire conversation for me. But they remembered me. I saw them the next day, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you're so-and-so from Prideful Sloth." Nobody knows us, and yet people from some of the bigger media outlets knew who we were just by recognition of that bag. So it sounds stupid, but that was a $30 piece of branding that I thought was funny, and it turned out to be something much bigger than I realized it would be. So then basically, have a GDC buddy. If you can, have somebody else there. it can get overwhelming holding conversations on your own for long periods of time. But if there's 3 of you there, you've got somebody else to step in and help with that conversation. You've got somebody that might get invited to something different than you that you can end up tagging along with. They've had a different experience to you, and so you can share those network contacts if you see them. And more importantly, sometimes I found my GDC buddy ended up pitching my game for me, and I ended up pitching her game for her. And it's just like, perfect, here's my marketing team. I'm just gonna sit back and have my Coke while somebody else pitches the game, because we're not very good at talking about ourselves. If you are, great. I know I'm not, and I know most people aren't. So having somebody else there who can talk about you for you can be really wonderful. And again, use it, this is just reinforcing. Meet people that you've spoken with. Even if they said no, even if they only gave you a cursory response and didn't say anything else, just email them and say, hey, I'm gonna be here, let's catch up. I use that as an opportunity to catch up with one of the platforms and talk with them. And while our project wasn't suited for what they wanted, I still sat down with them for an hour. We talked about how we'd actually overlapped on our projects in the industry, gave me a card and said, look, here's this. Give it to people locally. Give my contact out. If you think that it's something that is worthwhile, share my contact information. So, it might not work for you, but it might work for somebody else. So, there's value in doing that. And also, this was one that really kind of surprised me, is before I got off the plane, I already had follow-up emails. There's this whole etiquette of thanking everybody for all their time. And it was a little bit overwhelming and very sweet to get a lot of emails from people following up, whether that's just personal contacts, whether that's company contacts, vendor contacts. So I didn't actually factor in the time it would take me to respond in kind and do that for myself. But it's an entire etiquette that exists apparently that I wasn't aware of. And I highlight this: GDC is a bubble that you live in for a week with 27,000 other people. And it is, it's something that everybody else outside of that kind of, it is looking through the windows and seeing what's happening. And you're sort of living in this weird time warp where it's okay that you've been out until 2 a.m. and you were 10 minutes late to a meeting. People accept that. I mean, again, from business point of view, try not to be, but everybody kind of understands because you're all kind of in that same time warp of things took longer than I expected. I was out later than I expected. Just don't show up drunk. That's really, but in saying that too, when you live in that bubble, you need to pick what you're doing in that bubble as well too. I went with a very business-focused point of view, meet vendors, start continuing our network contacts. And so, I knew what I wanted to achieve from that at the very start. I also made sure that regardless of what time I went to bed, I was up and ready to go the next morning. Even though it killed me, I like 9 hours of sleep, and 5 to 6 hours of sleep was a very different time for me. But it also meant that I was mindful of everybody around me, even at parties. Now, people go to parties and they forget about what's going on. And again, it depends on what you're there for. But with a business hat on, if I turn around and run into somebody and just walk off, that could have been the person who was going to give me money for my project, and I couldn't even take the time to apologize when I ran into them and say, I'm sorry. So just think about that when you're going there too, because people get into a mindset and they forget about things like etiquette. And from my point of view, again, I accept that I'm a bit anal retentive. I'm a producer. That's kind of my life. But you never know who you're going to run into, and you could have run into somebody from media and been rude to them. You just don't know. So don't, be overly polite if you can. Just take an extra minute. An excuse me costs you nothing and possibly could start a conversation.
Just pretend you're Canadian.
So do we want to stop there? There's also art, though, unfortunately. So.
Yeah, we might have to call it a day.
Yeah.
Let's have you back for another talk, though.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And then we've got the questions. We might need to get out of the room, I don't know, but we're happy to continue to talk outside or whatever else too if you guys have got any further questions.
We're good for the room until somebody physically kicks us out.
Okay.
So we should be good.
All right, well, there's any questions, or if you can probably get the videos working on your laptop directly too. Maybe you want to just pull up some of the videos if people want to have a look at what some of the videos were.
Yeah, if you all crowd around the table.